Ahora vamos a irnos al corazón de Europa. Vamos a poner el acento en la integración europea y en las políticas responsables para fortalecer esa integración, para llegar a la Europa que queremos y necesitamos. Y lo vamos a hacer con el embajador Pasquale Quito Terracciano, Senior Advisor de Invest Industrial y el senador de la República de Italia, ex primer ministro de Italia, ex comisario europeo, el profesor Mario Monti.
Apreciado presidente Fainé, consejeros delegados, ejecutivos, queridos amigos, si ustedes me permiten de utilizar esta palabra, pero hay un tema de cercanía para mí. Para mí estar hoy aquí en Zaragoza es un poco como volver a casa. De hecho, durante 4 años, de 2006 a 2010, fui embajador de Italia en Madrid. Y entonces, desde más de 15 años ahora, sigo añorando Madrid de toda España cada día. E incluso aquí en Zaragoza recibí el título de defensor de Zaragoza. Entonces, estoy muy orgulloso de estar aquí otra vez. Durante mi mandato como embajador, pude conocer de cerca el entorno empresarial español, del cual pude apreciar su grande dinamismo. Y en cualquier caso, otro motivo de cercanía, gracias a la tradicional cercanía entre nuestros pueblos y nuestras culturas, un italiano siempre se siente a casa aquí en tierras ibéricas. A esta cercanía se añade la que une España, el presidente Fainé, con Invest Industrial, el fondo de capital privado creado por la familia Bonomi, que hoy tengo el honor de representar. Es una doble cercanía esta, en el entorno tanto empresarial como de compromiso social y filantrópico, y se basa en el sentido del deber, en el sense of purpose, como dicen los anglosajones. Este mismo sentido del deber es el sello del compromiso de Mario Monti en la vida pública italiana y europea. Mario Monti ha sido profesor a lo largo de su actividad, ha sido primero profesor, rector y luego presidente de una de las universidades más prestigiosas en el ámbito económico, la Universidad Bocconi de Milán, que alcanzó su prominencia global gracias también a su labor académica y a su capacidad de visión como rector y después presidente. Él ha sido 2 veces comisario europeo, primero para el mercado único y luego para la competencia, adoptando decisiones que marcaron un punto de inflexión en el proceso de integración europea y en la construcción de una gobernanza económica europea. Su carácter afable nunca frenó su férrea determinación cuando se trataba de actuar por el bien común, como demuestran las muchas decisiones que tomó como comisario europeo. Basta recordar una por encima de todas, la multa récord de 497 millones de euros impuesta a Microsoft por abuso de posición dominante en 2004. Y no por casualidad, Mario Monti fue el primero a recibirla por parte de colegas y medios de comunicación el apodo de Super Mario. Super Mario primero, podríamos decir, porque después, como sabéis, hay otro Super Mario segundo, que es Mario Draghi. Nombrado senador vitalicio por el entonces presidente de la República, Giorgio Napolitano, Mario Monti fue primer ministro italiano de 2011 a 2013, en un periodo particularmente difícil. Tras la crisis financiera internacional nacida por la subprime, Italia tuvo que afrontar una grave crisis de deuda, como también les ocurrió a Grecia, Portugal y España. Mario Monti, que había formado un gobierno independiente y tecnocrático, apoyado por la casi totalidad del Parlamento italiano, adoptó con rapidez y determinación medidas decisivas para hacer frente a dicha crisis. Reformas fiscales, reformas del sistema de pensiones y del mercado laboral. Estas medidas devolvieron a Italia la confianza de los mercados y de sus partenarios y le permitieron así preparar a nivel internacional, con su contribución fundamental al diseño de una nueva gobernanza económica europea y con una hábil labor de advocacia en el entonces G8 y G20, el contexto político que permitió al otro Super Mario II, Mario Draghi, pronunciar la famosa frase "whatever it takes", que sirvió, claramente toda la política que se adoptó por parte de la Banca Central Europea sirvió de escudo para el euro. Yo tuve el privilegio de ser testigo directo de esos memorables acontecimientos en calidad de consejero diplomático y representante de Mario Monti en el G8 y en el G20. Y creo que se puede afirmar honestamente que fueran los dos Super Mario quienes salvaran el euro en aquellas difíciles circunstancias. Mario Monti nunca ha dejado de creer en el ideal europeo y actuar conformemente. De él extraigo una gran lección. Europa somos nosotros, no es algo ajeno a nosotros. La prosperidad y la seguridad de nuestras naciones no pueden prescindir del éxito del proyecto europeo. Nos corresponde a nosotros actuar responsablemente como europeos para garantizar la seguridad y la prosperidad nuestras y de las futuras generaciones europeas. Y es por ello que, con gran placer, tengo el honor de ceder ahora la palabra al senador Mario Monti. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, señor embajador. En particular, porque me denominó Super Mario I y non Super Mario viejo. No, thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your exceedingly kind words. Ambassador Terracciano was really a key piece of those very difficult and very delicate moments when we had to interact with other European and non-European governments to really change the vision and the modality of addressing these financial issues. And I, at that time, worked very closely with the president of the Spanish government, Mariano Rajoy, and in some of these occasions, Spain not being represented, like the G8, we took quite a bit of responsibility also to act in the interest of Spain, which was, like Italy, not at a very strong, in a very strong position at that time. I'm happy to have kept a closer relationship with the ambassador, as well as with the Bonomi family, in particular with Carlo Umberto, who is here today. I've been following with interest their remarkable investment activity, especially in Southern Europe, Spain and Italy in the first place. And it is, for me, a great pleasure to see again, after some time, President Isidre Fainé, and indeed a privilege to have been invited by him to this highly significant event, who is really his creation. I first met President Fainé almost 30 years ago when I was European Commissioner for the Single Market, Financial Services and Tax Policy. Ever since, dear Isidre, dear President, you have been one of my key reference points in Spain, certainly the most solid and long-lasting. Over the years, I've come to regard and admire you as President of La Caixa, President of Fundación La Caixa, President of the World Savings and Retail Banking Institute, as a key pillar in Europe of the social market economy, rooted, I believe this would be your vision, rooted in the market economy, in the market economy's efficiency, but corroborated by two other fundamental ingredients, fundamental yet often forgotten, namely a long-term perspective as the appropriate framework for all major decisions, and a profound, genuine, massive engagement as regards las obras sociales. I must, addressing the leaders of the Spanish economy, congratulate you because just reading some press about Spain in preparation of this trip, well, I came to a very enviable set of assessments by the international press. Spain has become Europe's standout economy. Spain's deficit to fall below Germany's for the first time in 2 decades, not to speak of France. And Spain's booming economy collides with a barren politics. But what is economic and financial in Spain is at this time a reason for consideration and imitation by many other countries in Europe, and not only in Europe. Why have I suggested as title of this small presentation, European Integration and Responsible Politics? Because in my view, responsible politics, when it is responsible, it may also on occasions not be so responsible, but let's say the degree of responsibility of politics provides the main explanation to that aspect of our meeting today, del diagnóstico a la acción. We wonder why the series of excellent reports commissioned by the European authorities, allow me to add rather often commissioned to former Italian prime ministers. And Europe should not be that happy of the newly found political stability in Italy, which is good in itself, but it may dry up the flow, very abundant so far, of former Italian prime ministers ready to give a contribution to the studies for the better future of Europe. why are so many excellent reports produced, and why the concrete use made by the European and national political authorities of those reports is so modest normally. There must be something, so much that I would suggest, not only hilariously, that the next report the European Commission commissions should be on why the reports are normally not implemented, because there must be structural, administrative and political reasons which explain the implementation gap. Well, in my view, the main reason why there is an explosion of enthusiasm in Europe when these reports are produced and made public, and then there is a growing state of miscontent because they do not normally change the situation, not because they were not good reports, but simply because they tend not to be implemented. Well, this pattern, which tends to repeat itself, of course, I do hope that for the two outstanding reports in this moment, the Letta report and the Draghi report, the destiny might be different. But what happens normally is that when these reports are produced, there is what I would call the triangle of hypocrisy. On the first side of the triangle, we find European business, normally very supportive of all these reports, and I know by experience, very supportive of elements for a good analysis provided by the huge business experience and their associations to the authors of the report. There is enthusiasm, and what goes down to the public opinion through the press is normally, this seems to be a detail but is important, EU, wake up. It's normally Europe or EU, wake up, not member states, wake up. So there is an increasing pressure which is slightly misdirected, not so much towards the member states as normally the reports intend to do, but more towards the European Union. The Commission, which normally has supported and commissioned these reports, starts to be embarrassed because the EU, for the public opinion, is the European Commission. So they feel attacked, they go on the defensive, and they tend to do a bit less, sometimes even less, of what should be their main act, their main specialization in the division of labor in the institutions, that is to enforce the rules by the member states. So the Commission, I think, is assailed by the idea that these reports make Europe, i.e. me, the Commission, less popular, more criticized, so I become softer in enforcing the rules, thereby contributing to the lack of progress in the effective integration, like in the single market. Then there is the part in the game of hypocrisy of national leaders and their administration, because normally it is also a participation of enthusiasm by the heads of governments when such a report is produced. Here, finally, we have the blueprint for what we must do quickly in order to push Europe to become more integrated, more competitive, etc. And of course, we, national capitals, will do the utmost and very quickly. The time of the travel back from Brussels to the national capital, the enthusiasm remains verbally, but in fact, the soul of national leader, who is in the soul of each participant in the European Council, with this double nature, tends to prevail. And the national leaders, the prime ministers, the presidents or the presidents of the government, tend to listen attentively to the complaints of their respective administrations, which also in theory want a more integrated Europe, but are desperately embraced to what still remains of national prerogatives. I'm not criticizing anybody. I've seen this many, many times in my country and in all the countries of the European Union. And so the big hope and big enthusiasm turns out rather quickly to become a dissatisfaction for the delayed progress in implementing and in enforcing those new policies. And because many of the recommendations of these reports, including the Draghi report, in order to be translated into reality, have to go through the burden of a unanimous vote, this is a further decelerator of the whole process. You know, some time ago, I went back to the origin. I'm very proud, as a citizen of Milan, of the fact that the European single market was born in Milan in 1985 at the European Council under an Italian presidency. At that time, the presidencies were rotating. It was in the Castello Sforzesco, and the Council adopted the decision to call the first ever intergovernmental conference in order to go to the single act, the birth moment of the single market. Except that at the table of the 12, I was not there, of course, but I read the testimonies of Jacques Delors and others. At the table of the then 12 heads of governments of the European Council, 3 members said, no, we don't like this idea of setting in motion this single market through these institutional innovations. The 3 were Margaret Thatcher of the UK and the prime ministers of Greece and Denmark. Sided by Jacques Delors, the president of the Commission, the chairman of the European Council, Italian Prime Minister Bettino Craxi, concluded the meeting by saying, I notice a vast consensus around this proposal, so I declare it adopted. So that was still the time when, at the European Council, it was possible to proceed to monumental decisions like this one without each individual members being able to use the veto. So this historical memento may be worth considering, trapped as we are today in very frequent paralysis of decision-making. Why political responsibility? Well, because the behavior of national governments when they have to translate into reality the recommendations of a report or the decisions of the European Council, etc., is always filtered through the degree of responsibility with which national leaders take their role of co-owners of the European Union. Take what is considered in the Draghi report and elsewhere one main and very urgent piece for the competitiveness of Europe, the capital market union, or the union of savings and investments, as Enrico Letta called it. Yes, everybody is in favor of it, but look at the behavior in the last months of two governments, the government of Germany and the government of Italy, and also to some extent the behavior of the guardian of the treaty, the European Commission. Those two governments played for political reasons, without more admissible motivations, to derail or favor certain banking mergers and consolidation proposed by those in charge of those financial institutions. And for a long while, the Commission stood there and did not take decision. I remember the days in which, as just appointed competition commissioner, I had to assess the case Santander-Champalimaud. Some of you might remember. Well, there was no indulgence and no time lost. The Commission did its job, and the pretension of the Portuguese government to stop that cross-border acquisition was shut down. We have seen now, at a time when we all say Europe must become more competitive, but for this to happen, we must be able to use in Europe the gigantic pool of savings that Europeans create, but we need a capital market union. This does not happen. And ultimately, is it possible, in your view, that the most ambitious, probably, creation of mankind in terms of putting countries together in a project of federation, the European Union, might happen without wars, without civil wars? I just look at the process of forming Italian unity, or of forming the Federation of the United States. Look at what troubles and for how much time this happened. Now we come in the 20th and 21st century, and we believe that we must be smarter than our predecessors, because we seem to take it for granted that we will arrive to a real European Union without any pain. I'm not suggesting that we shall have civil wars or wars to get to the big prize of the United States of Europe. But is it imaginable that this process might happen not only without wars, without civil wars, but even without serious pain in the actors of the game, i.e. politicians? Can we expect that the actors of the process of unifying Europe might achieve the outcome in a swift, soft way without any real price for them to pay. And what is the real price for any politician to pay? Is to lose popularity and eventually to lose consensus and eventually to lose his or her job. How many times have we seen in Europe somebody fighting for European integration and even remotely risking, in order to achieve that, to lose their political job? Don't tell me I don't remember one case, because I do remember one case, which means that it must be possible. In 1998, the most powerful figure in Europe was German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, a giant of politics. He had achieved, with the cooperation of many other countries, the reunification of Germany. He wanted to preserve his country. You see, again, an interpretation of the national interest with the long-term view that Isidore Fainet would apply to this, not the short-termism of financial markets. Helmut Kohl did not follow the German man in the streets interpretation of the national interest, and he said, if we, now the largest country in Europe, the biggest economic force in Europe, if we were to be also, to continue to be, the only country in Europe with by far the strongest national currency, the German mark, maybe we Germans will be tempted, as we have been a couple of times in the past, to overwhelm the others. In this foresight of what is the national interest of Germany and the European interest, he decided to support the project of the single currency. He was the chief political force in Brussels to arrive at that decision. But then came the national elections in Germany in 1998. The German people, as I said, wanted to stick with their beloved Deutsche Mark. Kohl wanted to impose the euro. The opponent of Kohl, the Social Democratic Gerhard Schröder, was leaning with the will of the German people, and he campaigned against the single currency. Schröder won, became a chancellor, in many respects a very good chancellor for that matter, but not on this one. And this was the end of Helmut Kohl's political career. But he was the architect and concrete builder of the only solid pillar of European integration that we have put in place in the last 30 or more years. So, and I believe that the construction of Europe is no longer for the technocrats, is maybe more for businessmen, but above all is for us, the citizens, because when we choose our national representatives and our national leaders, we should perhaps, if we really care about Europe, if we do not, we should also not care about being conquered by whatever big force we have in the world around us. But if we do care, and if we want our political expression as citizens of Spain or of Italy or any other country to give a contribution to the construction of Europe, we need people who are ready to pay a price for this. We need a game of responsible politics. I will conclude by saying that I don't know whether I've been talking to you about economics, politics, or recent history. But as an economist, I am less and less satisfied of the responses that my category can provide to the construction of Europe. They are a necessary ingredient, but it's not economists who can find out the reasons why Europe does not make enough progress. I think much greater is the role of us as citizens and as electors. Maybe we should begin to think that European Federation will no longer be manna falling from heaven. It will have to be something conquered on the ground through our vocality and maybe through some form of insurrection. You would not have expected to have a guy come here today and consider that maybe insurrection might help achieve the dream of European business to have a really united Europe. But let me conclude with European business. I see for European business a huge further potential in the construction of Europe. After all, you have been, alongside with American business, the chief creator of the original European single market beginning in 1992. You desperately wanted that facility, which is the single market, and you believed somewhat naively that in a few days that would be actually on the place. But the political push of the business community at that time was fundamental. Now, I think that business should resume with big determination this effort. I know that many organizations are doing this. And please, if I may, this may not please some of you. Please be careful, think twice before being drawn into a Gulf Stream coming in part from the US, in part from big business in Europe, especially Franco-German, putting huge political pressure for deregulation as such, as if it were a fashion, and be aware that if Europe, under the combined pressure of big European business and the huge pressure by the current Trump administration, is brought to derail from its fundamental pillars, we are not going to gain in terms of competitiveness, and we are going to lose in terms of the identity of Europe. And I should conclude with a sentence that I read this morning in the paper of Teresa Ribera, who, with her characteristic, can I say, lack of timidity, which is a quality, the lack of it, very needed for the European construction, said that the US, by saying that they could modify their approach on tariffs for steel and aluminum, provided the EU is ready to water down its digital rules. Says Teresa Ribera, the EU cannot accept this blackmail. And it was a huge historical mistake that for 20 years we thought that we might do our construction of Europe without thinking of defense. Now the irony of history has shown that even if our supposed biggest potential enemy, Russia, has not yet taken actions on the soil of current EU, we are paying the price of not having set up a defense because we are exposed to another type of aggression, which is the aggression of the pressure of our greatest and best ally, the US, which tells us, sorry, but we have, if you want us to continue to protect you somewhat and maybe, we would be grateful if you dismantle, little by little, important portion of your integration, which has become a bit dangerous for our companies. So please, let's take all the elements of this complicated mosaic into consideration. Thank you for your attention. I'm not sure I put